Last episode, we watched the prosecution's version of due process start to come apart a little bit. Under cross-examination, investigator Tom Fassbender admitted that the RAV4, arguably the most important piece of evidence in this case, was unsecured and in the hands of Manitowoc County officers for nearly 4 hours, despite that department being under a legal conflict of interest. And his response, "It didn't concern me." We also tracked several law enforcement entries into Steven Avery's trailer and several more into his garage. And yet, that key piece of evidence, the literal car key, didn't show up until day 4 after multiple previous searches. And who found it? Link and Colburn, the 2 officers that Avery was suing. And let's not forget Kratz's failed attempt to sneak in Steven's past, his other acts, as evidence once the jury left the room. The judge shut that down again, but not before we saw exactly what kind of emotional manipulation the prosecution was aiming for. In today's episode, Fassbender's testimony continues. And then, once it ends, we'll also hear what Steven's post-conviction attorney, Kathleen Zellner, had to say in her filings about Fassbender. Let's get on with this testimony. In our last episode, we left off with Attorney Buting, one of Steven's defense attorneys, questioning Fassbender, and he had asked to take an afternoon break. And so they did take this afternoon break, and once the jury has done this and they've come back into the courtroom, the court then says, "Mr. Buting, you may resume your cross-examination." And Attorney Buting says, "Thank you, Your Honor," and his cross-examination is then continued. Couple things I wanted to clear up. You mentioned that some firearms, one of the entries to Mr. Avery's residence was to secure the couple firearms and a vacuum brush or something like that. Do you remember that? Yes. And that there were other firearms also on the other buildings, other residences? Yes, buildings, residences, cars, including one of the firearms taken from Mr. Avery's residence was a .22 Marlin rifle from Steve's residence? From Steven Avery's residence. Yes. Yes. There were also 2 other .22 Marlin rifles found elsewhere on the property, right? Did you say 2 others? Right. I know there is like another Marlin Glenfield or something. That was in Bobby Dassey's bedroom. I'm not even sure if that's where that one was. I'm not aware of the other Marlin, if there was one. Barb Jandas? No. All right. You also mentioned at one point, I think on November 8th, that the Wisconsin Crime Lab had to be diverted to some potential burial site. Yes. Some searches that were being conducted off of the perimeter, off the Avery properties, had come across a suspicious area that they thought, and I think the dogs actually went by it, that it could have been a clandestine burial site. Just to clear up, so the jury is not speculating about that. That turned out to be nothing, right? That's correct. Okay, all right. Now, one of the things that you did, let's go back to the 5th, to the RAV4 site again. And Attorney Buting says, "Could we put up number 86, please?" And Attorney Kratz says, "Me?" Attorney Buting says, "I'm sorry, is it on ours now?" And then he begins questioning again. All right. You mentioned that it looked like it was threatening, like it might rain. And so you were concerned about the elements of the RAV4 and all that, right? Yes. And I'm going to show you Exhibit 118 that you identified yesterday. Just take a look, and then I'm going to put that one up on the screen for the jury along with these 2. Also, show you Exhibit, that's a picture, 118, is when the tarp is just being started to be put over the RAV. Is that right? It's either when it's being put over or taken off. Okay. It's not completely off, right? You are actually in it, right? Yes. You are wearing the red? Yes. I just don't know if it's on or off, coming on or off. Okay. And let me put that up on the screen while you take a look at those two exhibits and see if you can identify those. All right. Attorney Buting then says, zoom in on that southeast corner, please. And then he resumes. Okay. Now, once again, just so no one is confused here, especially the jury, this picture is taken, Exhibit 86 is after the RAV4 had been removed from the scene entirely. This is like a different day, right? Yes. Could you point where the RAV4 was right next to that red vehicle, right? Yes. Okay. And exhibits, what are they? 143 and 144 in front of you? Yes. Those are what we're going to put up on the Elmo in a second, but those are photos taken from some place on the north side of this pond, looking towards the RAV4 while it was still there on November 5th, right? I believe so. All right. Then let's try the Elmo, if you don't mind. All right. Just for the benefit of the jury, when we were talking about 118, where we were saying that the tarp is partway on or partway off, whatever, that this is the photo we were talking about, right? Yes. And this one is apparently taken from a position somewhere east of the vehicle looking west. That's right. Now, at some point, though, the RAV4 was almost completely covered by this tarp contraption, right? It was a tarp that we tried to put over the vehicle without touching it. So we were using surrounding trees or whatever, or cars, sure, to do that. So it was more like a cover canopy type of thing that we were trying to accomplish. Okay. And so we haven't seen any pictures yet of what it looked like when it had, I think it was probably more than one tarp. Not that I remember. You think it's all just one tarp? I thought it was. If we used two, I don't recall. Okay. I'm showing you 144 first. And again, as you testified a moment ago, this is a picture that's taken from some position apparently looks like it's about just on the other side of that detention pond, looking kind of southwest. Yes. Okay. And that's what it looked like after the tarp was completely placed on it. I would have to agree, only the tarp doesn't look blue there. Okay. It might just be the camera. Was the tarp maybe two colored? One side blue, one side gray? Possibly, but the first picture showed that the blue side was out. Okay. And so an individual standing, this appears to be a picture taken, actually, closer to the RAV4 than one would be if they were standing at the car crusher. Would you agree? Isn't that the pond in the foreground right there? It looks like it. Yeah. Okay. Now, Exhibit 143 looks like maybe is a little bit farther back. I'm going to show you that one right now. Do you see the pond in the foreground there? Yes. And the Toyota RAV4 enclosed or covered by the tarps? Yes. So again, one standing over in this area, watching what might have been going on, or just taking a look at the scene, wouldn't have been able to see the RAV4 at all because it was covered. Is that right? Yes. So the tarps, and then Attorney Buting says, Your Honor, would it be all right if I published these to the jury since it's not all that easy to see on the Elmo? And the court says, we don't have slides of these? Attorney Kratz says, sure. You didn't ask me to do that. Attorney Buting says, I couldn't find any. I don't know. The court says, why don't the two of you get together off the audio and see if you can find them quickly? If not, Attorney Kratz then says, which one do you want up first, counsel? And then there's a portion that's off the record. And then the questioning continues by Attorney Buting. Okay, that is 144. Now we're looking at the screen. It has 144 on it, I believe, doesn't it? Yeah. And then could you just leave it there for a minute? So the purpose for the tarp, at least as far as you were concerned, was to try and protect the vehicle from the elements if it started raining, right? The vehicle, the items covering or concealing it, yes. Okay, and so you tried to drape these over branches and things to not actually touch it? Correct. so that there was room around it, like particularly in between the vehicles, and almost looks like that's a tent type opening or something on the one side of it, right? I don't know. All right. Attorney Buting then says, well, that's okay. Just show the other one and then we'll be done with this topic. Attorney Kratz says, which exhibit number, counsel? Attorney Buting says, that one is 143, isn't it, Special Agent Fassbender? The witness says yes. Attorney Buting says, all right. And then the questioning continues. All right. Now, when you searched the property, I mean, you walked around the property over the course of a week, right? And you became familiar yourself with various buildings and their locations. To a degree, we were quite busy in the command center that we didn't do that a lot. But to a degree, well, were you aware from your searches that there was an aluminum smelter located on that property? I was informed of that. I never saw it personally. Could we, let me mark this and see if this refreshes your recollection. Exhibit number 145 is then marked for identification. And then Attorney Buting continues. I'm showing you Exhibit 145. Tell me if you have ever seen that or ever saw that during that week. No. Okay. Well, we'll save this exhibit then. Nevertheless, you were told that there was an aluminum smelter on the property? Yes. And that, in fact, at some point during the investigation, you were aware that there was someone sent an anonymous letter that was found at the Green Bay post office that said body was burnt up in aluminum smelter 3 a.m. Friday morn, right? I'm aware of that letter. The exact verbiage, I'm not sure, but something to that effect. Yes. All right. And it was contained in an envelope from the Green Bay Police Department that had a big sticker on it, fluorescent green, that said check for latents, right? I believe so. Yes. Now, that letter sat in the property department of Calumet Sheriff's Department until I discovered it just this past November. Isn't that right? Until you discovered it? Until I pointed it out to you? That's where it was, yes. You and Mr. Investigator Wiegert were present when I found this particular letter in the property inventory, right? Yes. And was only then that it was sent to the crime lab to be analyzed for any sort of prints or anything, right? I believe so, yes. Is that because the body being burnt in the smelter didn't fit your theory that Mr. Avery was guilty of this crime? I felt it didn't fit the facts and the evidence. That smelter was examined by arson investigators and they determined that it didn't appear to have been used for a while. Did you suggest any DNA or the anthropologist examine it to see if there were any bone fragments? The particular arson investigator that examined that is the one that found most of the bone fragments in the burn area. And if that smelter had been used to burn the body, though, that would really tend to indicate that Mr. Avery wasn't guilty of this crime, because it would not make sense to burn the body in the smelter, take the bones, and place them on your own backyard, would it? Attorney Kratz then says, objection, speculation. Judge, we're not getting into what makes sense about what Mr. Avery did, are we? The court says, I will sustain the objection. Attorney Buting says, all right, I will move on. And then he continues. Let me just fast forward a little bit here to February and March of 2006, okay? Are you with me? Yes. Okay. By that time, through all of your investigation, you knew that as of that time, you had found no physical evidence linking Teresa Halbach to Mr. Avery's trailer or garage right up to February 28th. I don't believe that's accurate. What did you find? We found shell casings in the garage that did match up to the rifle in the house. This is a junkyard. People shoot guns all the time, right? I mean, you found shells all over the place, 40 acres, right? Oh, certainly, yes. Junkyard, these people were sighting rifles. You knew that. Shooting rabbits, the mere existence of shells without a link to a particular body doesn't prove anything, does it? I don't know if at that time our anthropologist had indicated, I can't indicated that there was possible bullet holes in the skull or not. But that would be, but if there were, the shells didn't link to that anyway, did they? The shells linked to a rifle found in the trailer. That's all it was. Right. Which could have had nothing to do with this offense, as far as you knew at that time. It could have been, no, we didn't know. Okay. And you mentioned on direct something about bloodstains and the crime lab finding little extra areas. So the jury is not left speculating for the next week about whether these were ever found to be Teresa Halbach. They were not. Isn't that right? That's correct. None of these bloodstains matched anyone except Mr. Avery. Yes. All right. And it was only on a subsequent search around March 1st and 2nd that a bullet, any bullets, any fragments of bullets or bullets themselves were found in Mr. Avery's garage, right? Yes, sir. Now, were you present for the execution of search warrants for Mr. Avery's trailer and garage again on March 1st and March 2nd? March 1st only, I believe, and just the beginning, the execution of it, and maybe half hour. Okay. And you are aware that they were doing more of these logs, checking people in and out of the scene as should be standard procedure, right? Yes. And you are probably on here somewhere. There you are. If you could identify Exhibit 147 for me, please. This looks like a entry log dated March 1st, 2006 at 3:30, 15:30 hours, Avery Road, State Trunk Highway 147. This would have been a login sheet out away from the two scenes of the residence and the garage, more of an entry type login sheet. All right, for everyone coming down that road. So anybody who is coming back on the Avery salvage property, that 40-acre area, is that right? I believe so, yes. And Exhibit 146? I had these two backwards, sorry. And this is March 2nd, appearing to be the same type of log, sign-in log, probably in the same area, more of entry log, okay, for that area. All right. You arrived at 17:35, 5:35 p.m., right? Yes. Can you tell me who arrived at 6:10? 1810 hours, Lieutenant Link from Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department. Lieutenant Link, did you ask him to come to the scene? I don't recall if I personally asked him to come to the scene or not. This was now 5 months after the original searches for that week of November, approximately. About 4 months, yes. Certainly wasn't necessary on that occasion for Mr. Link to arrive, to be somebody who would help search Mr. Avery's residence or garage again, was it? No, I don't believe he did search there. I think some of his personnel were there, and he, as their supervisor, I don't know if that's why he stopped out there. Is that his name squeezed in there, almost as an afterthought on the second to the last line? Attorney Kratz then says, I'm going to object. It's argumentative, Judge, as afterthought. It's absolutely improper. Attorney Buting says, I'm sorry, counsel is right. The court says, all right. I take it the question is being withdrawn. Attorney Buting says, I will withdraw the question. Yes, thank you, sir. And then he continues. And do you see Mr. Link again at the scene the following morning? Attorney Kratz then says, I'm going to object. Didn't Mr. Fassbender say he wasn't there the next day? And the court says, Mr. Buting, you might want to rephrase the question. And so he rephrases the question and again continues. Did you see Mr. Link's name on Exhibit 146 as having logged in and entered the scene again the morning of March 2nd? Yes. And at what time would that be? 8:49 a.m. All right. I will put it up quickly on the Elmo. Now, this search is the search that where a couple of bullet fragments were discovered, right? Yes. 5 months after the previous searches. 4 months. My math is bad, I guess. 4 months? Yes. Okay. And it's not like you weren't looking in the first search or having your officers look in that first, 5 entries to his garage the week of November 1st or 5th. to the 12th, they were looking for small items like that, right? Some of those searches were very specific for items. Some were not. Some were overall searches. Okay. And in fact, in none of these searches, one of those 5 entries at least, police did recover, you said, a number of shells to a .22 rifle. Shell casings lying on the floor. Okay. So not much bigger than the bullet fragments that were found on March 1st and 2nd. Actually, probably quite a bit bigger in comparison. If you have a bullet fragment like that and a shell casing like that. But this was your crack team of searchers, right? The best you had out there. This is the team I sent there. Yes. Okay. And did they bring shells back, but no bullets, right? The shells were laying in the middle of the floor, basically. At that time, though, none of the investigators knew that there would be evidence from the anthropologist that suggested that perhaps Teresa Halbach had actually been shot in the head with cranial pieces, did they? That information came later? True, yes. Shortly before this March 1st and March 2nd search? I don't know. I'm not sure when that information came. So, well, let me just see if I can refresh your recollection. Well, I don't want to waste time right here, but at any rate, I will move on. By that time, you did know, though, and that is what I'm talking about here is by March 1st and March 2nd of 2006, which are important dates in this investigation, you know this, right? Yes. Additional search warrants were issued, right? Yes. By that time, you knew that the mattresses, both bedroom mattresses, had been thoroughly examined by visually and otherwise for blood, and no blood was found, right? By March 1st and 2nd? Yeah, before that date. You know officers had gone into stripped the bedding, right? Yes, I just don't recall if we took the mattresses. Okay. And the court says, Mr. Buting, can you specify what mattresses we're talking about? And Attorney Buting says, okay. And the court says, I'm not sure that was done. And then Attorney Buting says, all right, let me put it this way. In the first, what did we have? 12 entries to Mr. Avery's residence. No blood was seen on the mattress in Mr. Avery's bedroom, right? I don't believe so. And no blood was seen on any of the sheets or bedding. I believe that's correct. And you have been to the murder. I don't know how many murder scenes you have been to, but you have been to bloody murder scenes before, right? Yes. Stabbings? Yes. You are familiar with cast-off blood spatter? Yes. That is, if somebody is stabbing a person who's laying on a mattress in the middle of Mr. Avery's bedroom repeatedly, there may be blood spatter on the ceilings and walls from the knife. There may be. And there was none in this case, right? None that we found. And no clumps of a woman's hair that were found cut off anywhere in the bedroom. That's correct. No trail of blood, as one would expect if you carry a body that's been stabbed on the mattress of Mr. Avery's bedroom through the house and out the back door. Unless it was cleaned up, no, we didn't see anything. And outside, on the back porch or on the front porch, that wooden deck, no blood trail dripping, right? If they would have went that way, they could have went out the back door also, all right, which has a little stoop, concrete steps. Yes. No blood in there, right? Not that I know of. No blood trail leading into the garage of Mr. Avery or out? Into the garage or out? Outside the garage? No, not that I know of. Okay, and inside the garage, a few bloodstains, but not Teresa Halbach's blood, right? Correct. So in short, then, by March 1st and March 2nd, when those search warrants were issued, 4 months of investigation had found not one shred of Teresa Halbach's DNA anywhere in Mr. Avery's trailer or garage. Isn't that right, sir? Yes. Thank you. The court says, all right, redirect, Mr. Kratz. And Attorney Kratz says, absolutely. And then Attorney Kratz begins his redirect examination. Agent Fassbender, describe for the jury the circumstances surrounding what Mr. Buting now calls the discovery of this letter from Green Bay. Why were you with Mr. Buting? Mr. Buting was being allowed to look at the evidence that was in our possession or in the Calumet County's possession. Do you remember who else was present? I believe Attorney Strang was there also. Do you remember Mr. Gahn being there? Yes. Do you remember Mr. Buting asking the prosecution if that letter could be dusted for prints? Yes. Do you remember agreeing to do that for Mr. Buting? Yes. Not forcing Mr. Buting to go to his own lab, but you would do it for him. Is that right? That's correct. And even though this letter had to do with the smelter, you had already eliminated the smelter as a place where Miss Halbach could have been burned in this case. Yes. Now, wait a second. You have already eliminated the smelter, and this letter has nothing to do with the case. Why did you send it off for prints for Mr. Buting? Because he asked us to do it. Mr. Buting also asked you to look at some photos today. I think it's Exhibit 142 and 143 of some tarps. Do you still have them up here? No, I don't. Attorney Kratz then says, do you know where those exhibits are? Attorney Buting says, I will get them. I think I put them back. Just 142 and 143? Attorney Kratz says, for now. And then continues questioning. Is this Exhibit 142, Mr. Fassbender? No, I have got 143 and 144 here. Well, look at the screen here. I want to know which exhibit this is. That, I believe that's 144. Yes, 144. All right. Mr. Buting asked if, from this vantage point, if a law enforcement officer would be able to see the SUV. Do you remember that question? Yes. What was your answer? Well, I can see where the SUV was tarped. All right. You can't see the SUV though, can you? No. Do you know where you were when this picture was taken? I may have been by the SUV doing the tarping. That's 143 and 144. This was the second exhibit that Mr. Buting showed you. Do you have this up there, Mr. Fassbender? 143, yes. Once again, the suggestion that if you were from this location, you couldn't see if somebody was approaching or tampering with the vehicle. Attorney Buting says, I object to that specific suggestion. That wasn't my question. Attorney Kratz says, certainly the inference, Judge. That's why he showed it. Otherwise, it has no relevance. And the court says, why don't you rephrase the question? Attorney Kratz says, all right, and then continues. Do you remember Mr. Buting's line of questioning about not being able to see this vehicle? Yes. Okay. Now, as we learned earlier in this trial, you put your cursor over a digital photo, says the date that was taken, 11/5 and 4:16 p.m. Do you see that on the screen? Yes. Okay. And exactly the same time and date as the previous picture. Do you see that? Yes, I do. The picture right before that Mr. Buting did not want you to see, Attorney Buting says, objection to that. The court says sustained. Attorney Kratz says, I will rephrase it. Attorney Kratz then continues. The picture that Mr. Buting did not show the jury shows a bunch of people walking up at the same time, the same location towards the SUV. Do you see that picture? Yes, I do. And whether or not Mr. Buting has it in his possession, are you one of those people? Yes. Are you walking towards that tarped SUV that Mr. Buting suggested you couldn't see? Yes. One picture after that Mr. Buting didn't show, you see some other officers walking towards that tarped vehicle, along with myself. Yes. Same time, same location, same tarped vehicle. Is that right? Yes. Let me ask you, Agent Fassbender, do you believe that at the time that these photos were taken, you were in a position to see if anybody either tampered with or entered that vehicle? Almost certainly. Under whose protocol was that particular vehicle at that particular time? The Calumet County deputy. Agent Fassbender, the defense attorney, Mr. Buting, asked, and in fact, I wrote down his question, whether or not on the 5th of November, the first search by Messrs. Tyson and Remacher, whether or not there was any evidence that was found that was linked to Miss Halbach. Do you remember that question? Yes. Do you remember what your answer was? I believe it was no. Okay. Do you remember on that first search, a note with Miss Halbach's phone number being seized from Mr. Avery's computer table? Yes, I do. And that note with Miss Halbach's phone number had the words back to patio door. Do you see that? Yes, I do. Do you recall now that that was seized on November 5th? Yes. Would you say that this is some evidence that was seized on the 5th that is obviously linked to Miss Halbach? Attorney Buting says, Your Honor, I'm sorry. Do you have a copy that we could mark, please? Attorney Kratz says, I do. I can have this marked. What I will do, Judge, is state for the record that it is item number 41. That item number corresponds to discovery that defense was sent. Unless there is an objection by counsel, I will replace it with an exhibit number. We can certainly do that, Your Honor. And the court says, what is the next exhibit number? The clerk says 148. So exhibit number 148 is marked for identification. The court says, all right, let's make it 148. Attorney Buting says, that's fine. I just wanted it marked for the record. Attorney Kratz says, I appreciate it. Thank you, counsel. And then exhibit number 149 is marked for identification. What will be item number 149 seized from the same computer table is another sign with Ms. Halbach's phone number. Is that correct? That's correct. Was that seized on the 5th of November as well? Yes, it was, sir. This address, 3302 Xander Road, we'll get into that with other witnesses. But do you now believe that this is connected to Miss Halbach? It's her phone number, isn't it? That's her phone number, yes. Exhibit number 150 is then marked for identification. Now, what will be item 150? Do you recall now that an Auto Trader magazine was seized from Mr. Avery's residence that evening? Yes, I do. This is the identical Auto Trader magazine that Miss Zipperer received, that she had testified earlier. You were in court when that was testified to, wasn't it? Yes. Exhibit number 151 is then marked for identification. Also, identically to Miss Zipperer, what will be exhibit number 151 was a bill of sale also found on Mr. Avery's computer table, again, identical to that received by Miss Zipperer. Do you recall that now being seized on the 5th of November? Don't you? Yes, I do. Let me ask you, Mr. Fassbender, do you know how many items of physical evidence were seized in this case alone, the Avery homicide investigation? Upwards of 970. Can you remember all 970 items of evidence that were seized? No, I can't. Mr. Buting asked you if knowing that Mr. Link and Mr. Colburn was involved in a deposition, whether or not you would assign them to search responsibilities. Do you remember that question? Yes, I do. Do you remember answering yes to that question? Yes. Do you have an explanation for that answer? Yes. What is that explanation? My explanation is, if they told me that, I would have asked them what the circumstances surrounding that were. Upon them telling me, and what I now know of those circumstances to be, I know there was no direct conflict of interest with these two individuals. They weren't working when he was charged and convicted on the original charge. And when they got deposed, Mr. Colburn was a jailer in that jail. And he received a call from another jail that an anonymous person said something about them having the wrong person in jail, and they have the right one. It didn't identify who it was, what it was about. Mr. Colburn did the right thing and forwarded that phone call to the Detectives Bureau. Mr. Colburn was not even a sworn officer. Mr. Link wasn't even a detective at the time. He was working the road. That call went up to the Detective Bureau and was handled by whoever was up there at that time. And then, when Mr. Avery was exonerated, Mr. Colburn made a comment to Mr. Link, something to the effect that, boy, I wonder if that call they took way back when was Mr. Avery. They had nothing to do with this. So that, as far as you know, was Link and Colburn's connection, this mysterious connection to this civil lawsuit. Is that right? Yes. Knowing that, as you sit here today, as the lead investigator in the case, have any problems at all with Link or Colburn's involvement in this case? Absolutely not. Do you know how many law enforcement officers, how many citizens, and how many other witnesses were deposed as part of that lawsuit? No, I don't. Finally, Agent Fassbender, whenever a Manitowoc County Sheriff's deputy was asked to assist in this entire investigation, that is, when any search was done out at the scene, were they accompanied by a Calumet County or state DCI agent? Yes. Attorney Kratz says, that's all the redirect I have, Judge. And the court says, any recross, Mr. Buting? And Attorney Buting says, just a bit. And the recross is begun by Attorney Buting. Now, you weren't deposed in this civil lawsuit yourself, right? That's correct. You had nothing to do with it. You were a truly independent, objective investigator at that scene? Yes. Okay. Link and Colburn, though, were deposed about their own conduct in 1996 regarding a phone call that might have resulted in Mr. Avery's spending 8 more years in prison because of the way they handled it, right? I believe the way they handled it was correct. Well, what you believe, sir, isn't really the issue. The question is what they believe. And I can't speak to what they believed. That's right, you can't. Thank you. The point of the matter is also that neither one of them told you about this connection. Attorney Buting then says, you can take that or leave it on for a minute. And then he continues. Neither one of them told you that they had been witnesses in a civil lawsuit, did they? That's correct. And both of them volunteered to go search Mr. Avery's residence, didn't they? I don't know if they volunteered or they were asked, but they did it. All right. They did, though. Yes. Yeah. And both of them knew, or you could tell us, if you thought that they knew, that their boss had already found enough of a conflict or appearance of conflict with Mr. Avery's lawsuit to turn over authority to a neighboring county. They knew that. I would assume they knew that. Okay. And with that knowledge, they still didn't say, oh, hey, by the way, we should tell you about this deposition that we both had 3 weeks earlier. Did they? Attorney Kratz says, objection, asked and answered 3 times now, Judge. And the court says, I'm going to sustain the objection. Attorney Buting says, all right, and then continues with his questioning. You recall my questions to you about whether any items linked to Teresa Halbach was whether any physical evidence linked her inside his trailer or garage, right? Possibly, I don't remember if it was physical evidence or not. All right. This bill of sale has no date. Could have been any time, right? Correct. The phone number for Teresa Halbach being in his residence is certainly not a surprise because we know from the records that he had her phone number and had called and arranged a sale just a few weeks earlier, right? Attorney Kratz says, objection, argumentative, Judge. The question was whether there was anything that linked Teresa Halbach to that trailer. Attorney Buting says, that was your question. That was not my question. And the court says, well, at this time, it was not my understanding that the subject matter was the strength or probative value of the evidence, but rather just whether any evidence had been seized. I'm not sure where we're going. Attorney Buting says, okay, and then continues. None of those 4 prospective exhibits ever show that Teresa was inside the trailer, do they? No. Attorney Buting says, thank you. That's all I have. And then there is further redirect examination by Attorney Kratz. And he says, that's evidence that Bobby provided. Isn't that right? That's correct. And Attorney Kratz says, that's all I have. Thank you, Judge. Attorney Buting then says, I object, move to strike the question and answer because it's not the testimony. Bobby Dassey never said he saw her in the trailer. And the court says, I'm not sure I understood the question that's being objected to. Attorney Buting says, that was a clear inference on counsel's question, if not the direct. The court says, I'm going to sustain the objection. I think it's beyond the scope of redirect. Witness is excused. Mr. Kratz, we'll let the state get started on the next witness. And Attorney Kratz says, if you would like, Judge, we will call Mr. Brandis to the stand. And at this time, we're going to end this episode because we need to get into Kathleen Zellner's documentations about Fassbender's testimony. Before we get into the wrap up of this episode, we need to talk about something that won't come out during this trial, but it absolutely matters. And this is in regards to Kathleen Zellner's documentation. So after the convictions, Steven Avery hired a new attorney, Kathleen Zellner, and she didn't just look at the case. She took it apart piece by piece. And one of the people that she zeroed in on was investigator Tom Fassbender. But in order to explain why, I need to give you a little context, especially if you're new to this case. So another person involved in this case is someone by the name of Brendan Dassey. And Brendan is Steven's 16-year-old nephew at the time. In March of 2006, months after Teresa Halbach disappeared, Brendan was pulled out of school and interrogated by law enforcement. That interrogation was conducted by none other than Tom Fassbender and his partner, Mark Wiegert. Now, Brendan wasn't your average kid. He had significant cognitive delays. He had no history of violence, but after hours of questioning, alone, confused, and without a lawyer, he gave a confession, one that put both him and Steven at the scene of Teresa's murder. And just like that, law enforcement finally had the story that they'd been missing. But here's the thing. The details in Brendan's confession didn't match the physical evidence. They didn't match the timeline. And honestly, they didn't make much sense. But still, this confession gave investigators something else, a justification. It gave them a reason to go back into Steven Avery's garage again, months after they had already searched it. And guess who was right there when this new evidence just happened to show up? Tom Fassbender. Now, fast forward to Zellner's investigation. She doesn't just call all these tactics sloppy. She calls them suspicious. According to Zellner, Fassbender and Wiegert were involved in nearly every major decision about collecting and documenting evidence in Steven's case. She points to how and when key evidence was found, like the bullet fragment in Steven's garage, which was discovered on March 31st. That just so happens to be the same day that Ken Kratz, the prosecutor, learned that Brendan had said Teresa was shot in the garage. Coincidence? Zellner doesn't think so. She also notes that Fassbender was present during other pivotal searches that turned up evidence after Brendan had already been coerced into giving a confession that lined up perfectly with what was found. She argues that Brendan's statement wasn't just unreliable, it became the script. And everything that came next was about finding props to match that story. She also points out problems with documentation, chain of custody issues, inconsistencies in how the bullet and the RAV4 were handled. And she puts responsibility squarely on the shoulders of investigators like Fassbender. And her view, this wasn't an honest investigation that uncovered inconvenient truths. It was confirmation bias in action, a case that was built backward from a confession that never should have existed in the first place. So, no, none of that came out during Fassbender's testimony. But knowing what we now know, it casts this shadow, right? So while Fassbender's testimony might have seemed really routine on the surface, there's a whole lot more going on underneath it. And as we keep peeling back these layers, you'll see just how deep that might go. So next, let's move on to unpacking what we did here in this most recent testimony of Fassbender. We've wrapped up the testimony of investigator Tom Fassbender, one of the lead figures in this investigation. And we've seen the defense begin to press on issues like evidence handling, search timelines, and the lack of physical evidence linking Teresa Halbach to Steven Avery's trailer or garage. As we move forward, keep in mind what's not found can be just as important as what is. Next time, we're going to hear from William Brandis Jr., a volunteer firefighter who helped locate the RAV4 license plates, and Trooper Cindy Payne from the Wisconsin State Patrol, who was also involved in that same search. And that's coming up in episode 21. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate all of you. Please like and subscribe wherever you listen. We will see you next time. Bye for now.